Hi, my name's Mike. Today we're going to be looking at this little elm. Now this was collected as a sucker from another tree, and while the top is quite a good potential for developing into a small bonsai, the roots are really nothing to write home about. There's a big flare on the bottom where it was attached to the tree. It was a sucker growing off the roots of another tree. But there is a big bulge here where it was taken off the tree, where it hasn't sprouted any roots. There's also a very pronounced single root that's coming off this trunk at the bottom, which is really not suitable for a small bonsai. So what I will do today is I'm going to ground layer this and try and produce a secondary set of roots, so I can then disconnect it from the original rootstock in a couple of months. The process I'm going to use is ground layering, which is very similar to air layering in many instances. The main difference being that you take the layer very close to the soil line of the tree and very close to the original. It works on most trees. On some it will take a lot longer than on others, but in general it's a good way of improving the root spread of potential trees. So I'll bring the camera in a bit closer and talk you through the procedure as it goes. First of all, what we're going to need to carry this out. First of all, we're going to need a sharp knife, which will be used to remove a ring of bark around the bottom of the tree. This is just an old plastic plant pot which I've cut and enlarged the hole at the bottom to give me room to accommodate this trunk. Some damp sphagnum moss and some well-drained bonsai soil. Now this is the soil that I'm using, is recycled bonsai soil that I use from repotting, and then sterilise it in an old roasting tin over a barbecue, so it steams and makes sure there's no nasties left and no seeds that might germinate in there. Additionally, I've cut a little ring of, this is a weed control membrane that will fit into the bottom of this pot. Because what I want to avoid is once that pot is placed on here and the tree produces new roots, I don't want any of those roots to grow down into the soil, because that'll give me all sorts of problems when I come to disconnect that tree from the original roots. So hopefully you can now see this big wound scar here where the tree was removed from the original mother tree, and also the sort of confused roots and this very strong single root that's coming along here. So first decision to be made is, where do I want the new roots to grow? Now I want to retain a little bit of this flare along the roots, so I'm going to make the incision as close as possible to the bottom of that. Now you will need a sharp knife for this, so I'll just make an incision all the way around this trunk at the bottom, and then you can see that trunk is about as thick as my fingers. So I'll take about an even thickness of that, which brings me to about here, and I will now do the same here and just bring an incision all the way around the trunk, which defines my line where I can then remove this bark. Now, being midsummer, there's plenty of water being pushed up in the bark, so it will come off pretty easily. Now many people say that you might want to leave a slither of bark that connects the two. I don't believe it carries any benefit on elms, because they are such vigorous trees. They will use that bridge to bridge the gap basically, and heal the wound rather than bring out new roots. So I'll just clean that up a little bit. I might actually have to take a little bit more off the bottom here, just to make sure that gap is wide enough, because as I just said, they are vigorous and they will close that gap pretty quickly if they're allowed to do so. So that has now given me a break between the original roots and the tree. Now the one thing to be sure of here is to make sure you scrape this area. You don't want any of the cambium left on this gap, because again that will bridge, the tree will use that to bridge that gap and try to heal the gap rather than produce new roots. So I'll make sure I scrape that right down to bare wood and remove any trace of cambium that might still be there. Now on trees that are less vigorous than elm, some people recommend to use a rooting hormone and put the rooting hormone onto this top layer. Now with this elm I know it's very vigorous, so I shall not be doing that. Onto that tree. As you can see, it's cutting it open makes it fairly easy to handle. Now I want that as close as possible to the soil line and as evenly as possible from the edges of the trunk, so it gives me an even spread of roots. I'll then place this disc of membrane in the bottom, which will hopefully prevent the roots that will form from growing down into the original soil of the container. Because then I'll fill. Let me just actually tape that up a little, just to make sure that that is tight before I start putting the soil into there. I'm just using a bit of gaffer tape here to close that gap in the pot, which should hopefully hold until we're ready to disconnect. So then it's quite simply filling in some soil into the pot. As I said, this soil is recycled. It has been sifted, and it's quite a fine mix, because I wanted to retain water as much as possible and while still giving me good drainage. So I fill that pot to about sort of 5 centimetres above the actual cut that I've made, and now I top the whole lot with a bit of damp sphagnum moss. Again, that helps me to retain the moisture in that mix that I've put into that pot. So what remains now is just to water through this layer. I've got some water there. So I'll put a good amount of water in there to ensure that soil is thoroughly wetted in there. And I can see that draining out. I can see that draining out at the other side. And I'll just compact that down a little. And that's the job done. So what will happen over the next couple of months is this tree will produce roots inside this pot, and I can easily check that. I can take this bit of tape off, just open that pot out a little to see what's happening in there and if any roots are forming. July is generally maybe a little bit late to do this sort of work. You really want to start it off as early as possible in spring. So I hope that's given you an idea how to do this procedure. As I said, it works very well to enhance the root spread on some trees that might have potential but are sort of held back by the roots that are there. So I hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully I shall see you again. Thank you and goodbye. Okay, well, I've got the camera out here in the garden. I thought I might as well show you an update on that maple that was defoliated earlier in June. As you can see, it's back in full leaf now. It's returned to its spring colour as it was earlier in the year. So if I zoom you in a little bit, you can see maybe a bit clearer the way that has responded to its leaf cutting.